Sonatype runs the Maven Central repository, which is where all the open source Java is for the world. So everybody doing Java development is in some way downloading some open source components from us. So it gives us really wide visibility. And we would go talk to organizations that we knew were downloading tens of thousands, many tens of thousands of components from our repo alone, a year. And they would say, we're not using open source. It's like, yeah, okay. Maybe your definition of open source is open office and Linux and Firefox, but you're completely unaware that actually your developers are pulling this in all day long. And by the way, if you tried to stop them, you wouldn't be able to deliver anything because you basically can't develop on a modern language without somehow using open source components. So, the awareness does not penetrate the leadership in many cases. And some of the studies that we've done, some of the findings that Stephen has worked on specifically covered that in the surveys over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think another interesting distinction between how companies approach their own software and how they approach open source is in like the practices, the security practices there. So it's pretty standard now at least larger organizations, often, even starting with small companies, it's pretty standard to do code review, right? To be using some sort of static analysis tool, to be using a dependency management tool or an SCA tool, right? Those are almost universal practices, certainly considered best practices and widely implemented in industry. If you look at open source practices in that space, the rates are much, much lower. So the OpenSSF scorecard project, the Open Source Security Foundation, they have a system for monitoring open source projects, looking at GitHub metadata, looking at code reviews, the pull request and the code review that happens there to sort of score projects and see, are they following best practices when it comes to code review, and then other practices as well. Are they using SAST tools? Are they checking binaries into their repository? Things like that. And so we took a look at that data in this last year's report to just see overall, what are the rates of these various practices across open source. And for code review specifically, I'm sort of focusing on that one because it's sort of, if you're going to do one thing, do that, right? So it's scored on a 0 to 10 scale. OpenSSF scores at 0 to 10. 0 is like there's no evidence of code review at all, right? And then you get partial points if you're reviewing some things, or maybe there's not a formal review in the sense that like people are commenting on the pull request, but at least someone other than the person who submitted it is the one who merged it. So there was at least two individuals involved. So there's sort of a peer review process, maybe implicitly. You get sort of partial credit all the way up to like 10 points is you're doing it in the best way you could, like reviewing and discussing every code change, right? So 19%, only 19% of open source projects scored greater than 0 at all. So like 81% are scoring 0, no code review, and only 2% are receiving the full score of 10. So that would just not be allowed in industry, right? Like you would pause production and revamp your security apparatus to get better development practices in place.